Great. So that's what I'll talk about. And this is joint work with Noga, who couldn't come to the workshop. So she would be giving a better version of this talk if she were here, but this is Noga. And the talk today, so after hearing a lot about non-interactive proofs and arguments, actually, now I want to talk about interactive proofs and arguments. So we have a prover and a verifier, and they can exchange messages. Ideally, for not too many rounds, at the end, the verifier should accept or reject. The claim is that X, the input X, is in some language L, and we have our usual completeness and soundness properties. For an interactive proof, we want soundness against any unbounded cheating prover. So the probability it can get the verifier to accept is at most a half. And we can bring this down using parallel repetition. For an argument, the soundness is relaxed only against polynomial time cheating provers. They're uniform, not uniform. That won't be so important in the talk today. And we can also use parallel repetition, and Moni. But anyway, so the probability that the verifier accepts should be negligible, no matter what polynomial time strategy a cheating prover tries to follow. And there are various complexity measures that we're interested in with these protocols. So I'm going to focus a lot on the rounds. So we heard about non-interactive, where we have a common reference string and one message. But for today, we can have many rounds of interaction, and we want the number of rounds to be small, the communication to be small, the verification time to be small, and also, I'll get to it, we want the honest prover to run in small time. Okay. In fact, today I want to focus on constant round protocols for most of the talk. Okay. So I said I want the prover to run also. The prover running time is going to be important. So we're in the setting of doubly efficient proof systems or argument systems. So the honest prover should run in polynomial time. We're concerned with languages in P. Okay, so unfortunately, P is overloaded for the prover and the class, but you know which one I mean. So the verifier should be super efficient, and I'm going to focus on almost linear verification time. Okay, so either n times polylog n or n to the 1 plus sigma for some small constant sigma. In particular, verification should be much more efficient than the decision problem and actually deciding whether the input is in the language. And the prover also should be reasonably or relatively efficient. It should run in polynomial time. Okay, so the running time for proving is about the same or only polynomially larger than the running time for deciding the language. Okay, so all of that is stuff that you probably already know and hopefully love. What's the question for today? So the question is, what kind of cryptographic assumptions do we need if we want to get these kinds of arguments? So I'm not talking about zero knowledge at all today. I'm just in the setting of arguments for languages in P. And the point is that the verification should be linear time, whereas deciding the language requires some large polynomial. Okay, so I want these kinds of arguments with a constant number of rounds and an almost linear verifier and efficient honest prover. Okay. So what crypto assumptions do we need?
Is an unbounded prover
Same question on the first part, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's easy.
I mean, the prover can invert the one-way function and be convinced.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy in the trivial sense. That, the honest prover is allowed to just invert a invert a one-way function. It can convince you of anything. But actually, yeah, I mean, I'm talking about doubly efficient. I mean, all the results here are new even without this. I mean,
I don't understand the answer. Why is it easy?
So if you want an argument that is complete and sound, where the honest prover is allowed to run in exponential time, and the cheating prover is only allowed to run in polynomial time, then the verifier just asks the prover to invert a one-way function, and if he succeeds, the verifier accepts whatever the prover is saying. So you'll have completeness because the honest prover in exponential time can invert the one-way function. And you'll have soundness because the polytime cheating prover can't invert the one-way function. But it's
sure, but this is still like a quite non-trivial object. Like we don't know if one-way functions are by one-way functions, maybe less. But like what is no? It's not. It's still a.
I think it would be implied probably by average case hardness. No, you need to sample the.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't want to go beyond below the existence of one-way functions. So for me, it's trivial. I do want. It's a good question. It's a good question. Okay. So what do we know in terms of using cryptography to get arguments for languages in P. The classic result that people have talked about today is Killian's result, saying that using collision-resistant hash functions, you have a protocol with 2 rounds or 4 messages, where the communication can be as small as polynomial and security parameter. The protocol is doubly efficient. It can work for any language in P, or if you want to go beyond P, you can even get it for languages in NP when the honest prover gets a witness for membership. So what more can we ask for once we have such a result? One thing, we can try to reduce the number of rounds, and we've heard a lot about that. But what I want to ask is, what happens if we don't want to assume collision-resistant hashing, right? I know that nowadays that seems like a very mild assumption, but still, it's a serious assumption. The minimal assumption, in some sense, for some variants of cryptography, is the existence of one-way functions. Right? So what can we do only assuming the existence of one-way functions, or equivalently using the work of Orr and Young, a universal one-way hash function, which is an object we'll get to. What kinds of argument systems can we construct? Okay, so that's the question for today. And the new result I want to tell you about is that assuming only the existence of one-way function, we show that any language with a, is this showing or not showing?
Sure, you can see
showing? Okay. Any language that's computable by polynomial size, by a family of circuits of polynomial size and linear depth, up to linear depth. I don't want to talk much about uniformity, but the circuits have to be uniform, in particular log space uniform. Every such language has a constant round, doubly efficient interactive argument. Okay, only assuming the existence of one-way function. If you want to dig a little bit deeper into the complexity of the protocol, for any desired small constant sigma, you can get a polynomial number of rounds in 1 over sigma. And the communication and verifier time are almost linear in the sense that they are n to the 1 plus this arbitrarily small constant. And the prover, the honest prover, runs in polynomial time. So just assuming one-way functions, if what you're interested in is linear communication or almost linear communication and verification, you can get linear depth circuits in a constant number of rounds. More generally, if you want to know what happens for general depth D circuits, the communication and the verification time scale linearly with the depth of the circuit. That's the new result.
Do we know that any connections to be done with GKR also?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about GKR on the next slide, but I don't. Okay, so we certainly don't know of such a result, information theoretically. The result we know about the number of rounds scales with the depth of the circuit. Why don't I bring it up because it's on the next slide. So this is what we get. And the result of GKR, the Shafi is unconditional. So there's no assumptions made, but the number of rounds grows linearly with the depth of the circuit. And Lafayette is asking, can you hope to get this result unconditionally? I don't know the answer. I think it's unlikely. So one thing that guides me when I'm thinking about this is for many of the problems for which we have unconditional interactive proofs, getting a proof system with really large soundness error is trivial. Okay, so if you just want to get soundness error like 1 over the circuit's probability of catching a cheating prover 1 over the circuit size, that's trivial. The point is getting a constant soundness or a smaller soundness. And I don't know unconditionally how to get any soundness error without paying a number of rounds that's linear in the depth. Okay, so it's an interesting question. I mean, you could formulate a conjecture about the power of interactive proofs that says, this is hard, or like you could take it to alternating computation if you look at it from a complexity theoretic perspective and phrase a conjecture there. And I mean, I don't think it's known unconditionally. I don't think that it would make like the polynomial hierarchy collapse or anything like that, but I think it's unlikely that you'll be able to reduce, or I would be very surprised if you could unconditionally reduce the number of rounds beyond the circuit depth, below the circuit depth.
What would happen to the communication in the
Yeah, so the verifier time is about linear. The verifier needs to read the input. I added it while he's looking. So the number of rounds is 2 or 4 messages. The communication becomes a security parameter. So independent of the depth, this works for any polynomial time computation or any polynomial depth. The verifier time stays.
So you just wrote the prover time as poly in the circuit. I mean, GKR, you can make it very tight, right? Later ones it shows that make it tight.
Yeah.
Is this, do you think it's possible to do here?
I think you probably, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that getting it to be like circuit size to the power 1 plus sigma is going to be easy using those results. And I don't know about like really linear time.
For the prover time, you count the time like between each round and generating the next message, right? Not like they prepare things in advance.
I am counting it. I'm not in some sort of an offline online model.
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, usually we talk about offline, online for the verifier time. I don't think there would be a big distinction for any of these results.
But if you're using the exponential out-one function, to then the sigma gets logarithmic or logarithmic?
I think so, but you know, we didn't work out the details, and these things can be tricky. So I'm going to conjecture that the answer is yes, but we actually didn't prove it. And then, you know, yeah, you want this n to the sigma that appears here and here to be polynomial or something like that. I think yes, but you know, yeah, like
Is the technical question. So when you say n is the input size or the circuit size, or where on
n is the input size to that.
where does the circuit size come in this?
I'm just assuming it's polynomial, and if I showed you the prover time, then it would come in the prover time. But the verifier doesn't care about the circuit size, and that's sort of the point. Good. So I want to tell you about how to do this protocol, and for that we have to start with this picture that's been traveling around for a while. So I want to give an overview of how the GKR protocol works, and then we'll see the result is based on the GKR protocol. So let's start with that. So we have our computation. That's a big circuit. So the width of the circuit is some huge polynomial like n to the 10, but the depth is small. It's only d. And it's a Boolean circuit with fan-in two gates. And the way the GKR protocol works is we take every layer of the circuit. So we fix the input x, that's in the bottom layer, layer D, we call it. We look, you know, once the input is fixed, every gate in the circuit gets a certain value, 0 or 1, up to the output gate, which suppose the output is claimed to be 1, the input x is in the language. And now we can look at each layer of the gate. That's a Boolean string, basically, a string of the values in those gates. And we can encode it using a high distance error correcting code. In particular, we use a low degree extension. And the way the GKR protocol works is we look at this view of the circuit, we encode all the layers, and then we have what we call this consistency subprotocol that starts at the top with a claim about the output layer of the circuit and sort of unwinds the computation from one layer to the layer below it. Okay, so we start with a claim about the encoding, the error correcting encoding of layer I. Okay, WI is the values in layer I. We have the encoding of the ith layer at some location Ri that has been fixed by the previous rounds. That's claimed by the prover to have value. The encoding is claimed to have value Vi. And if this is, we reduce this claim, or verifying this claim, to verifying a claim about the next layer, layer I plus 1, where by reduce, I mean, if this claim was true, then the honest prover following the protocol will arrive at a new claim about a lower layer in the computation that is true. And if the claim was false, then with high probability over the verifier's coins, the claim that we arrive at will be false. So that's the soundness guarantee of this consistency subprotocol. And then once we have that, the GKR protocol follows naturally. We just do this iteratively, right? We start at the output layer. Presumably, the cheating prover is making a false claim about the output layer, and we unwind. We use this consistency subprotocol to get a claim about layer 2, and then about layer 3, layer 4, all the way down till we get a claim about the input layer. And the input, the verifier can just compute by itself one coordinate in the low degree extension or some other encoding of the input and verify the prover's claim. Okay. So that's wonderful, right? Hopefully you all are really excited about that. But the key point is that we need to do it iteratively, right? We have this false claim about the output, and then we run this protocol. We get a false claim about layer 2. And then once we have that false claim, we can run the protocol to go from layer 2 to layer 3. Okay, but it's iterative. So it's iterative, it sucks. We need at least d rounds, and in fact, you need d times. Depends on what variant of GKR you use. You can actually do this subprotocol for going from layer to layer in a constant number of rounds, but certainly you need at least order d rounds. So that's not going to work for us. We need a different idea. We can't just parallelize, at least not trivially, the GKR protocol. And the idea is going to be to try to first get the prover to commit to all of these encodings of all the layers. And by commitment here, I mean something that is binding. So a locally openable binding commitment. I don't really care about hiding today. So the first thing we're going to ask the prover to do is to commit to all of the layers, all d of the layers, right? The values of all the layers are known to the prover in advance. Once we fix the input, all of the layers, their values are fixed. We can ask the prover to commit to all of them. Okay, just try to hold on in your mind and not worry about exactly how I'm going to build this commitment or what it's doing. But the idea is, ask the prover to commit to all of the layers. It sends over decommitments, okay, but it sends all of them in parallel. Okay, so we're paying decommunication, but we're not paying many rounds. Okay. And what we want to do, and I'll tell you in a minute how we do it, is in parallel to check all of these commitments. And we want to catch the prover if there's some layer I where it sent a false commitment to the ith layer, but a correct commitment to the layer below it, layer I plus 1. And so that's, I want in parallel for every I to check whether this is the case and catch the prover if it is. Okay. And the point is that the verifier on its own can check, sort of ask the prover to open the commitment to layer 1, see that it's really a commitment to, you know, that's just the output gate of the circuit. So it's a commitment to the value 1. And the verifier can also check the commitment to the input layer, right? That's just the input. It can run in almost linear time and compute, assuming we have such a commitment, and compute the correct commitment. So the prover has to be lying about the commitment to the output layer, and it has to be telling the truth about the commitment to the input layer. So somewhere in between, it's going from a false commitment about a layer, about a top layer, to a true commitment about a layer below it. Okay, so there exists some I where hopefully we can catch him. So how do I want to do that? So this is all we care about now. We know there's some place where there's a true commitment and there's a false commitment and a true commitment right below it. Ideally, you know, what I would want is to use something like the consistency subprotocol. So arrive at a situation where I have a false claim about the encoding of layer I, and then, you know, reduce that to a false claim, run the consistency subprotocol, reduce it to a false claim about layer I plus 1. Okay, so if I have a false commitment, now it sent me a false commitment about layer I want to get from that a false claim about the actual encoding of layer I, and then run the consistency subprotocol to get to a false claim about the commitment of layer I plus 1. But in layer I plus 1, he sent me the correct commitment. So we can't open it to a false value. And now I'll catch it. Now I'll catch the prover. Okay. So it sent me a false commitment about layer I plus 1. I'm going to ask it to locally open. So I need a locally openable commitment to locally open the value that it committed to in the I plus 1th layer at the location that I'm interested in. And then I'm going to catch. Yes, something bad happened. Okay. So
why is this true? Why is second preimage security?
yeah, so that's what, sorry, I'm afraid to go back because then it goes back the whole slide, but ignore it, don't see it for now. Do you have a question? Or? Okay, so the point is, and now kind of if you get anything from the talk today, this is I mean, other than the result, this is an important point to get. All I assumed, or all I needed to catch, was a situation in which the prover sent a correct commitment to layer I plus 1. Now, the value of layer I plus 1 is fixed in advance. Once we fix the input to the protocol, the true value at layer I plus 1 is fixed. And he sent me the correct commitment to that layer. So all I need is a hash function where you can't locally open, you know, you can't break the commitment with a local opening for a string that was fixed in advance before the hash function was chosen. So all we need is a second preimage or targeted collision-resistant hashing. And that's why we can hope to use universal one-way hash functions that can be based themselves on one-way functions. Okay, so that's a key point where we're replacing collision-resistant hashing with something much weaker.
So what's the abstract property of the GKR protocol?
Yeah, I'm going to have it as an open question at the last slide. Maybe we'll get to it in the end. I don't have a clear answer for you. I think we have this interesting phenomenon where for all of the interactive proof, the succinct interactive proofs that we've thought about, we can reduce the RAM complexity in this kind of way. And I think it begs the question of whether there's some sort of a general compiler, but I don't know the answer. To that.
Again, you said locally open. You don't mean only locally open, right? When you get it, where do you get it from the locally open commitment?
Well, where do I get a locally open?
Yeah,
Yeah. I use a hash tree with YOFs, and that works.
So you don't need hiding for the commitment, right? It's
Don't need hiding.
It's just a hash.
Yes.
It's locally openable hash.
Locally
Or you don't
openable
want to call it.
Yes.
Or you don't want to call it a hash.
I'm happy to call it a hash. Is that what people call a locally openable hash? I certainly don't want a hiding property, so you can call it whatever you want.
So it's not just any hash.
Yeah.
So you're saying that right here, we should understand why one-way functions are.
No, you just should understand that we are at a no, because I mean I haven't explained where do we come with this false where we come with this false claim that we can reduce to a claim about layer I+1, but you should get I don't know, like a flavor of why one-way functions are enough. Because first the input is picked, then we send the hash function, and now we're sort of forcing the prover in some place to send us a correct commitment to layer correct commitment. So this is layer I+1, and this is layer I, and we've kind of forced the prover to send us a correct commitment here, an incorrect one here. This was for something that was fixed in advance, and he's committing to strings that are sort of computationally, from the string he's committed to here, it's computationally easy to compute the string is committed to here, so you can hope that you can catch this very efficiently. But the point about the important point about the one-way function is that the commitment is to a string that was fixed in advance, and that's why, I mean, I think it's sort of magical that that these YOFs exist in the first place. But once we know that it's much easier to build commitments.
I'm
going to do all of these in parallel. So there's some place where this good situation for me happens. I don't know where it is. And I can just check all of them in parallel. I pay, in terms of communication, I pay the circuit depth, but I don't pay in the rounds.
So Guy, you haven't told us why we can do it in parallel.
If you can get to this situation where you have a false claim about layer I, then just do all of them in parallel. If you have a claim about each of the layers, you can just run the subprotocol in parallel for all of the layers. For the layer I star, kind of where this good situation happens, you will catch the cheating proof.
And then why can't you do it in parallel for GKR too?
Because you don't have these. Okay, so I haven't told you how we get these claims about the. Yes. So in GKR, I have to get the claim about the ith layer before I can proceed to layer I+1.
So in some imaginary world, in order to show that one-way functions are necessary, which probably not, but let's say they are. Is there any hard computation here? I guess at some point, it's based on
That's a very interesting question. So
could you show some way say that this implies some kind of computational hardness?
it would be interesting to already show some kind of moderate hardness would be interesting to show even, because everything here is polynomial time, so it seems hard to extract like a super polynomial.
But where is there some relative something harder than something else?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was gonna maybe mention it then, but I'll say it now that if we think about the analogy, so for zero knowledge, there are these kinds of results. Like first, there's Ostrovsky-Wigderson that showed, in some sense, that in non-trivial zero knowledge there is a one-way function. You have some hiding property, but still, I kind of just want to say so. There are these results, first Ostrovsky-Wigderson, and then the results of Salil Badan that show that in non-trivial, the minute you have non-trivial zero knowledge for a language where you don't have statistical zero knowledge, then you have some computational hardness. And I think it's really interesting to try to start exploring whether something like that also holds for argument systems. And one stumbling block we've always had is that for zero knowledge, one-way functions are enough. For arguments, they were not. So maybe here there's a start to kind of import such a program.
Like, how does it compare to RRR?
How does it compare to RRR? So
Just to understand where this computational.
maybe you'll ask me at the end because we're in the middle of the protocol, and I guess we've taken one
Like, in
detour.
terms of the result, like what is that makes this? Like,
There are two things that make it different for RRR. It's a different class of computations. So it's bounded depth as opposed to bounded space, and these are incomparable. Also, if you look inside the number of rounds, here it's polynomial in this 1/sigma.
Okay.
That is bound.
I think it's, yeah, so the bounded space is the main thing.
Yeah.
So if you want to prove the hardness here, you need to
From that distinction.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I still haven't told you how we get in parallel false claims about all of the layers I. Okay, so I need to do that. I'll do it in a minute. I just want to focus home in for a moment on the properties we need from the commitment. So we only needed binding for the correct commitment of the I+1th layer in the circuit. So the properties we need for the commitment scheme, second preimage security or targeted collision or something like a universal one-way hash function. We wanted it to be succinct, locally openable, and based on one-way function. And you can do this just by using universal one-way hash functions in a tree. Okay. The important thing, in case you're interested in really exploring this further on your own, is you need to make sure that in every layer of the tree you're using a new Yoff. Okay. If you just use the same one in all of the layers, it won't work. But I think this is Bilar and Rogaway that said you should use different ones in different layers of the tree. I don't know. Okay, so now what I want in situation is just to show you, or the main question that we still have is the prover has committed in advance. It sent all the commitments to all the D layers of the circuit. And now we want in parallel for each of these layers to arrive at a claim about the encoding of the layer, where if the commitment was false, then the claim about the encoding should also be false. And then hopefully Rachel will be happy.
I'm always happy.
Big one.
Okay, so what we want is to translate false commitments. So if the prover has sent the wrong commitment yi to a false claim about the encoding of the ith layer, and we want to do these. And once we have such a protocol, we'll do these in parallel, and we will be done. Okay, and the way we do this is using what we call a translation protocol. It's an interactive proof, so this is information theoretic actually, in our construction, for translating the commitment into a claim about the encoding of the committed string. Okay. And we want to do this, we want such a protocol that works in a constant number of rounds. I want to say just, the commitment itself, maybe it's good to just, before we make things complicated, to keep them really simple. The commitment is just a computation, right? We have some correct string, the correct encoding of the ith layer wi, and we're building a hash tree on top of it, right? And this is the root of the hash tree, that should be yi. That's the correct computation. Okay. Really, all I want here is a proof system that gets a claim about the output of a circuit. This is just a hash tree circuit. So we have a claim about the output of the circuit, and we want a false claim about the encoding of the input to the circuit. So you can use any holographic interactive proof. There are many interactive proofs that have this property, like the GKR protocol or the RRR protocol, that you can use in order to translate claims about the output of the computation to a claim about the encoding of the input. You could use any of them. And maybe if you just use GKR here, the number of rounds would be proportional to the depth of the hash function, of the circuit computing the hash function times the depth of the tree. Still, you'd still end up with a protocol here whose rounds complexity is independent of the original circuit. So that's already interesting. We're running all of these in parallel, right? We're getting all of these yi's in parallel, so we can run all of these proof systems in parallel to get false claims about the encoding of a layer of each of the layers. So that already is interesting, but really I want to focus because the round complexity would not grow with the depth of the circuit, but rather with the depth of the hash function. So it would already give us a result, but I want to take it as far as I can, which is to get a constant number of rounds. Okay, so we want this protocol, basically a holographic interactive proof. If you're into this terminology.
So that's interesting. So what's the deepest hash function we get with pretty flat ones,
Yeah, so actually, I'll ask you about. So what's the shallowest universal one-layer or one? Sorry,
What's the shrinkage?
The shrinkage has to be polynomial. Because I want a constant depth for the whole tree. So
with constant shrinkage, it can be NC0.
But based on one-way functions, right?
Yeah. No. So it needs to be like one-way. Yeah. Based on something that doesn't give you collision-resistant hashing, I guess.
Yeah. Polynomial shrinkage will be super constant. No, but that should be, well, we can conjecture it's not a standard assumption to take a random function with constant locality. I think it will give you it's
we looked into it at the time. There was nothing super interesting. Anyway, we will be able to get a constant number of rounds using not just using GKR, but using a different protocol. Okay, so I want this protocol that gets the input y, the claimed commitment y. We have a holographic input w. We'll want to get a claim about the encoding of w as an output of the protocol. And as usual, if the claim is true, we get a correct claim about the encoding. And if the claim is false, then with high probability, either the verifier rejects or we get a false claim about the encoding of the input. And we want a constant number of rounds. We want the verifier to run, I guess, in time n to the sigma here. Not even, it's not even reading the entire input. And the way we go about getting this protocol will look familiar to you. So we want to strip away the layers. We have a hash tree. Okay, so here maybe we have, this is of size n to the 100, and we'll shrink it every time. We'll shrink, I don't know, by sigma in the exponent. So the next layer will be 100 minus sigma, and the next will be n to 100 minus 2 sigma. So after order 1 over sigma layers, we get to the output of the circuit, and we'll strip away the layers one by one using a subprotocol of the form that we already know and love. So we have a claim about the encoding of one layer, and we go from that to a claim about the encoding of the next layer down. However, notice that here, between the layers, we have a computation of the hash function. So it's a non-trivial, this is not a constant depth computation or anything like that. So computing this complex hash function, and nevertheless, we want to go from one layer to the one below it in a constant number of rounds.
If you replace this with algebraic degree, you can generalize this to algebraic degree.
this makes
I don't know. So I guess somehow we could do some sort of rebalancing and a la what you do with formulas, but I don't know often. Okay, so that's what we want to do. And now I have to warn you, there is a sharp transition because I just couldn't move Noga's slides to this format. So actually, if anyone at Apple is watching, I apologize that I've deviated from the Apple. These are not Apple slides. These are Noga slides. So that's our hash tree. And again, we want to have this protocol that goes from an encoding of one layer in the hash tree, a claim about the encoding, to a claim about the encoding of the next layer in the hash tree. So that's our layer subprotocol. We're back. We're safe. Everyone can breathe again. So, and the key point here is I don't want to think about this.
Hope they don't fire.
I hope not. At least it would be a dramatic exit, right? Okay, so the point is that, again, these computations going from the inputs, kind of the things we're hashing in layer I+1 of the tree, the next layer up, this is a complex, that's the complex computation. We're doing a Yoff computation here with polynomial shrinkage. So we don't want to just use GKR or something like it. We could use RRR, but that's a whole different can of worms in terms of the round complexity. Instead, we just think about this as a batching kind of a claim. Okay, so along the lines of, I guess we're pretty familiar with batching from the previous two talks. So really what we have here in terms of the claim is that there's a claim about the encoding of these yi's, the outputs of the hash function. The claim is that if you encode all of them and you look at the location Ri of this encoding, you'll have a certain value. And that these yi's are all the outputs. Each of them is the output of the hash function on an input zi in the next layer down. Okay, so we think about this as kind of a batching claim. We're verifying that this is true and this is true and this is true, this is true, and that there's some global truth about the encoding of all of these yi's. And then we can use a batch interactive proof from a previous work, a different RRR with Ron and Omer, to get constant round complexity and polynomial and into the sigma communication. You can use the small space or directly. You would have kind of an exponential round complexity in 1 over sigma, and I want to have polynomial. So that's a downside. I mean, I guess this is a good point because this is all I want to say about the protocol. So you asked about the comparison with the doubly-efficient unconditional doubly-efficient interactive proofs for small space or for bounded space. So one thing is that bounded space and bounded depth are not the same. And the other thing is that in that protocol, the round complexity, if you want to get communication into the sigma or something like this, plus whatever the space is, you need the round complexity to be exponential, and even more than exponential in 1 over sigma. More than exponential in 1 over sigma. Here we're getting the round complexity to be something like 1 over sigma cubed. Kind of like a technical difference in the parameters.
Okay. Can you give me some information? What are those RIs that you're going to check?
The RIs are the locations. So it's kind of a location in the low degree extension. And you're asking where it comes from?
Yeah, what the protocol actually check? What the protocol, which location the protocol would actually check?
So are you, I'll try to read your mind, but are you interested in the RIs in the protocol outside or here? Because there are RIs that are sort of internal here as we're doing the hash tree verification, and there are those external RIs that you might be asking where we got them from.
Like the external.
You're asking about the external ones. So we basically have this whole protocol that starts with this YI claim about the commitment, and it ends with a claim about the encoding of the input at some location. And let's call that our R that we're interested in. And that comes from iteratively running these protocols in sequence, one after the other. So we start with a claim about it has nothing to do with the consistency subprotocol that was being run outside. So maybe or it's not the same way that we get them in the GKR. So we're just starting with a claim about the commitment, the commitment of this layer. We're running a bunch of interactive protocols for each of the layers in parallel. And the output of this interactive protocol that's being run just for this layer of the circuit, we're only thinking about it. That's a claim about the encoding of layer I at a particular location R. And that's where it's coming from. So we're getting all of these locations R in parallel from protocols that we're running on the different commitments that we got.
So you're going to check the R's for random or like?
R is random. That's a property of the protocol. Verified by looking inside the protocol, and it makes sense that it should be.
So each one of these Y's is a GKR level. At the depth there has to do with the hash between the values over there. And this I now in here corresponds to the depth inside of those hash trees.
Right.
Okay, but you're saying that what is this UP? What is UP? How does that come up here?
It's just that I mean, especially after we don't have batch verification for general entry statements, but this is you sort of think of it as
unique here. What's unique?
I could have even said for P essentially. It's just it's a batch verification for statements in P, right? Like it's just like given Z1, it's a polynomial time computation or an n to the sigma time computation to compute what the correct Y1 is. Actually, I'm lying a little bit because again, that's already a circuit that's too. I mean, as it is, it's a high depth circuit, so it's too much. So you actually need in the proof, you actually shrink this circuit down by sending the tableau as well, intuitively for each of these ZIs, and it's something we pay for, but I'm brushing it under the rug. We do in fact need
It's a
batch
blow
verification for
the
UP.
hash statement.
Yeah, yeah, the tableau for the hash statement. So actually, there's a lot of technical work that gets into really getting the round complexity down, which in particular means you need to replace these circuits with something that's in AC0, and you do that by adding the tableau as usual. So you really need to use that. If you kind of cheat a little bit, but that's a detail that comes in. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. Basically, from one-way function, we can build these locally openable commitments using a Yoff tree, and from that get constant round arguments for depth D. And to my knowledge, at least, it's the first instance in this regime of succinct, so where we're focusing on succinctness. So we know how to use one-way functions to get zero knowledge, for example. So we know how to do non-trivial thing in interactive protocols using one-way functions, but in the regime of succinctness, of getting a doubly efficient proof or getting the communication and the verification time to be smaller than the size of the computation, as far as I know, it's the first instance of being able to use just a one-way function and not a collision. I mean, we have results for multi-collision. Sorry, I should have said it. We have results from previous work for multi-collision hash functions. But here we're able to get all the way down to a one-way function. And of course, there are natural open questions. So can we lose the dependence on D? So can we get an interactive argument for any polynomial time computation, just assuming one-way functions? I think it's a fantastic open question. Can we go all the way to NP? I'm a little bit more skeptical, but I don't know why I'm skeptical. I have no good reason to be skeptical. The reason I'm skeptical is that the Yoff type of guarantee isn't enough once you go to NP. There are multiple. Okay, great.
That's a more complicated reason.
Okay, so there is a reason. Excellent. Excellent. Good. So that's a motivation. And going back to Yuval's question, can we show a general transformation for any interactive proof or for some nice abstract family of interactive proofs, essentially showing that you can always replace interaction with by bringing in one-way functions? That would be great. That's all I wanted to say.
Now we have a break for an hour and a half, unless you want to ask some questions. Only an hour and a half. Let's schedule. Lunch is on roll. Let's see back here at 1:30.